Hello, my name is Ellie Gu. I'm editor of Personal Finance and the Energy Strategist. Today I want to talk a little bit about an area that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, which is energy efficiency. A lot of times the word energy efficiency is sort of associated with the environmental movement and government policy. In other words, the government trying to encourage people to conserve energy or use energy more in a better way. But the reality is that the main driver of energy efficiency historically has been simply the price of energy. When oil prices are rising very quickly or very high, companies have a real incentive to go out and try to cut their oil consumption. And the reason for that, of course, is just simply profits. If you can cut your oil consumption and do the same thing with less energy, then you're going to have a leg up on your competitors who are using more. So it's really not traditionally been driven by government policy. It's traditionally been driven a lot more from simple prices. Couple of examples. If you look at countries which are don't have a lot of domestic energy supply, an example being Japan, has virtually no oil or natural gas supply whatsoever domestic to it. They're very energy efficient simply because necessity is the mother of invention. Japan has become a manufacturing power because it had to with as little energy as possible. If you compare it to a country like the US or most of the Western European countries, Japan is extremely efficient. So how do we play that? Well, there are a couple of different ways which we've been talking about a lot in both in the Energy Strategist and in Personal Finance. One way is aerospace. If you think about it, airlines and air freight carriers are probably one of the most exposed industries of all when it comes to fuel prices. Fuel prices soared in the summer of 2008. Were the huge cost center for the major carriers. For example, in 2008, Delta spent over $12 billion on fuel alone. Simply because oil prices go up, airlines can swing from a decent profit to a sizable loss. So there's a real incentive to cut back on fuel consumption there. On the air freight side, not quite as bad traditionally, but certainly it can have a very large impact on profitability. So how can an airline go about cutting their fuel costs? Well, one way is by adopting more fuel-efficient aircraft. And one of the big areas of interest there is what is the actual airplane made of? Traditionally, airplanes have been made of a lot of aluminum coupled with a little bit of composite material. Now, what is exactly is composite material? Composite material really consists of two basic parts. One is a reinforcing material that is sort of makes it stronger, and the other and more rigid, and the other is sort of another material that sort of bonds it all together and keeps it together. What are an example of composite materials? Well, probably fiberglass is the most common. Most consumers are aware of that. That's been used in boats and a lot of other consumer goods for years. Another one is carbon fiber, which most people are aware of. Carbon fiber is actually extremely strong and extremely light. Has a high strength to weight ratio. And that really makes it ideal in airplane construction. If you can reduce the cost of a plane, it'll use less jet fuel per hour or per passenger. And that means you have lower cost per passenger. You can have higher profit margins even when fuel costs are higher. So what we're seeing is the next generation of airplanes coming from Boeing and Airbus are having a much higher percentage of composite material relative to aluminum and titanium and other metals. For example, the current 767, Boeing 767, that were built, that started coming into production back in the 80s, were only about 6% composite material. If you look at the 777, which went into service in the 1990s, it was up around 12% composite material. If you look at the new Boeing 787 Dreamliner, due to go into service over the next couple of years, that's over 50% composite material. So that makes it a lot lighter and as much as 30 to 40% more fuel efficient than equivalent sized planes. The large Airbus A380 airplane is about 23% composite material. And Airbus actually has another model which is coming out within a few years, which is going to be even higher than 50% composite material, even a larger composite material content than the Dreamliner. So how do we play that? There are a number of different ways. Look at some of the aero parts suppliers, companies that build these composite materials for use on airplanes. One of the interesting things about a lot of these suppliers is that they have long-term supply contracts with companies like Boeing and Airbus. And in a lot of cases, they sell to both companies. And that's a beautiful thing, because if you think historically, there's been this huge ongoing fight between Boeing and Airbus, who has the best planes, who gets more orders, whose new designs are better received at the Paris Air Show. But the reality is the real winners there are going to be your air part suppliers, companies that sell to both Boeing and Airbus. They don't really care who wins because they have contracts with both companies. Another area to look at from an energy efficiency standpoint is freight rail and freight trucks. From a freight rail standpoint, and I've said this before, but your average train can move a ton of freight 450 miles on a single gallon of diesel fuel. That makes it about 4 times more fuel efficient than an equivalent sized truck. On the passenger rail side, and you look at things like high-speed rail that are being heavily government subsidized right now, that also is extremely energy price dependent. In the summer of 2008, we saw a huge uptick in ridership on the Tokyo Metro, the London Underground, the New York Subway, and really light rail systems the world over. Really, people are responding to higher energy prices. When energy prices are higher, they conserve energy, and they do things like use more light rail. This benefits a number of companies in the U.S. Look at the big freight rail carriers. Typically, I like to look at some like Union Pacific that have big exposure in the western U.S., and some that have big exposure in the eastern U.S. like CSX. Also look at companies that supply parts and equipment to the rail industry. Examples would include a number of companies that are involved in selling brakes into the rail industry, companies that are involved in selling electronics into the rail industry, and companies that actually design and build high-speed rail networks. They're going to benefit from the drive for higher efficiency as a result of higher prices. They're also going to benefit from a huge wave of government stimulus and spending on things like high-speed rail. So to kind of summarize it, traditionally as energy analysts, we tend to look at how to produce more power to meet demand, how to produce more power to meet rapidly growing demand from places like Asia. The other sort of flip that on its head, and what you look at is companies have an incentive to go out and spend money to try to become more efficient when oil prices, natural gas prices, whatever, are high. That's going to be beneficial to any company involved in energy efficiencies. A couple areas I mentioned: aerospace, big drive to buy new planes that are 30-40% more fuel efficient than the existing fleet, and also freight and passenger rail companies. Thank you very much.